Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a good sunny morning this as I drove from the east side. So hopefully all of you will have a good day after this. But today we have a number of things on our agenda. So we'll call the LCCMR committee to order. Today is Monday, April 24th. Let the time reflect that it's 8:32. As I glance over here to that clock, whether it's 8:32. And this meeting will be held according to Minnesota Statute 13D .015. The state entity meeting by telephone and interactive technology. So to provide feedback on digital accessibility of meeting information, please submit comments through the Minnesota Legislature Accessibility and Usability Common Forum. And to learn more about the requesting a combination, please visit the FAQ for disability access or contact the Legislative Coordinating Commission. Public viewing is available here in person and also on YouTube. The first item on the agenda is roll call, and I'll pass it on to Diana. Could you please give a roll call?
Acomb.
Present.
Acomb present. Albrecht.
Present.
Albrecht present. Backer.
Present.
Backer present. Deestick. Faber.
Faber present.
Faber present. Gibson.
Present.
Gibson present. Green. Green present. Hanson.
Present.
Hanson present. Her.
Present.
Her present. Heinzman. Hollins.
Hollins present.
Hollins present. Langseth. I do know Langseth is having some technical difficulties, but she should be right back. I'll go back to her. Moore. Morrison. Peichel.
Present.
Peichel present. Reese.
Reese present.
Reese present. Westrom. Westrom is excused. Langseth.
Present.
Langseth present. Currently, there are 10 members present, 7 excused.
Okay, well, thank you, Diana.
There is a quorum.
All right, we have quorum. So next on our agenda is item number 2. We're going to go over approving minutes from March 21st and March 21st of 2023 and August 30th of 2022. I'll let Becca explain the need for this editing.
Good morning, members, and we can take these in 2 different motions or one motion if you prefer. Going back and looking at some prior meeting minutes, we noted that an oral amendment that had been made during or oral clarification that had made during the meeting did not make it to the minutes. So if you look at the minutes from August 30th, 2022, we've got some strikeout and underlined language on page 2 and page 3 that clarifies some acres of land and the width of an access easement that the commission provided approval for.
Representative Hanson, Chair Hanson.
I move the March 21st minutes and move to correct the minutes from August 30th, 2022.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, motion passed. Okay, let's see, August 30th. Becca, or do you someone
Yep.
we just did that, right?
Yep.
All in one.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So next on the agenda is member report potential conflicts of interest regarding today businesses. Then Diana.
Chair Her, I need to make a correction. I had mismarked 2 members for roll call, and there's actually 12 members present.
Okay. Just one member present.
Conflict of interest? If there are no conflicts of interest, we can just move on to the next.
Okay. All right. Any conflict of interest from members? All right, next on the agenda is director report. Director Baca.
Good morning again, members. For the director's report, I just have an update on legislative status of bills that are moving through right now. Again, we do include the status of the bills in our weekly updates from LCCMR, but want to just provide a quick update here. So language related to LCCMR funding and policy recommendations, per diems, and LCCMR membership and terms has been incorporated into a House Environment Omnibus Bill, which is House File 2310. That bill was heard in committee and passed off the House floor last week. The Senate Omnibus Bill, which is Senate File 2438, currently does not include the LCCMR recommendations or other LCCMR related provisions. That bill passed off the Senate floor last week. So these 2 bills will now go to conference committee where differences between the House version and the Senate version will be reconciled, presumably including the ENRTF LCCMR portions. I did want to mention, members, that rider language is being added to all appropriation bills this year that I believe were developed in response to findings in 2 recently released audits by the legislative auditor. Those audits are not LCCMR related, but they do cover some of the similar subject matter. There are differences between the versions of the rider language on the House and the Senate and among different bills, but at their core, they do include additional review of nonprofit grantees and fiscal capacity and provide some additional options when a review is determines that a nonprofit is a high risk to receive a grant. And if that does pass, we can talk more about that at the meeting in June 8th to talk about implications for LCCMR. But right now, LCCMR, for the most part, does all those reviews already. Additionally, there's a constitutional amendment bill, Senate File 2404. The author is Senator Her, and then House File 1900 with the author being Representative Hollins. The Senate version was amended and passed its first committee. The House version was amended in its first committee and is now waiting to be heard in Ways and Means. And then as far as anything else to report on, just to let you know that I believe Rick Heller will be providing oral testimony at the end of the meeting. And that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Nash. Next on the agenda is item number 5, presentation from recent completed project. Now we have opportunity to hear about a couple of previous funded projects that finished their work in the last 6 months. This is an opportunity to learn about the result from some of the good work funded by the Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund with our efforts. We have 2 presenters today, each of whom will speak about 10 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes for question and answer. The first presenter will be joining us remotely and is Mr. Michael Joyce, who will be speaking about den boxes for fishers and other nesting wildlife. Welcome, Mr. Joyce. Please introduce yourself. Are you in line right now? Okay, please.
I am, yes. Chair members, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Michael Joyce with the Natural Resources Research Institute. Can I share my screen then to show the slides that I have?
Yes, you may.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about this project that we just completed. The impetus for this project is concern over our fisher population in Minnesota, which has declined by about 50% over the last 20 years. So we've invested a lot of time. The trust fund has invested a good deal of money to help us learn more about what's going on with our fishers in Minnesota so that we can identify threats that they may be facing and respond to those threats so that we can really adequately manage and conserve this species, which is I would call the charismatic member of our natural heritage here in Minnesota. So we're considering a lot of different factors, but one of the factors we're concerned about is habitat. And so generally fishers need things in the forest that aren't as abundant when we manage our forests. And so one of our longstanding goals with our fisher research and with other research we do is finding ways that we can balance the needs of our wildlife with our human needs and uses of the forest as well. One of the critical habitat elements that fishers need are large trees with cavities. These provide a safe, secure place to rest in and for females to give birth and care for their young. And so tree cavities of this size in general are rare in our forests. They're not very abundant, even if we're not doing any management. They take a really long time to develop, but they can be lost quickly and relatively faster where we are managing our forests. And so what we're really interested to learn with this project is, can we use den boxes as a habitat management tool? And if so, where and how should we do that? And so we put out about 100 den boxes over and then monitor them intensively, mostly with trail cameras for the last 3 years. Well, what did we find? We found that fishers do use our den boxes, and they use them for a variety of different purposes. The most frequent use of our den boxes by fishers was for resting, especially in the fall and in the winter. We also saw fishers bringing prey into the den boxes and stashing it for later. And we saw fishers using den boxes on several occasions for mating related behaviors. So this image on the right here is a female fisher tucked into a den box, a male fisher on the outside. He's asking in polite a way as a male fisher can if she'd be interested in mating, and she's kindly and politely refusing that. So this is one use that we saw. We did not see any instances of fishers giving birth to their kits or caring for them really early on when kits are not very mobile and when they're completely dependent on their mothers. We did, however, see on several occasions females bring their kits to boxes once they're a little older and closer to independence. And here's one example of 2 young kits playing on a box, chewing on it a little bit. So we did see some really cool use. Overall, though, we did not see as much use by fishers as we were hoping for. We saw fishers present at a little less than half of our boxes. And the number of boxes where fishers actually use the box was a little less than that, closer to 20% of our boxes. And so the other thing that we saw is that fishers on average take a really long time to find our boxes. So we're talking about sometimes more than 6 months on average, and sometimes they didn't find a box for more than 2 years after we put it. So we're not 100% sure why that is, but that's something that I'll compare to the other species that use it in just a second. So while we didn't see a huge amount of use by fishers, we did see a ton of other wildlife visiting and using our boxes. Obviously, things like moose, they might show up, they might look at a box, they're not going to have much else to do with it. We saw bears tearing them down in some cases, which we weren't too fond of, but as they say, bears will be bears. But we did see a number of other wildlife actually using our box. Pine martens, flying squirrels, that's the picture up here, a flying squirrel bringing a mushroom into a box. We saw gray and red squirrels use our boxes, and we also saw weasels use our boxes. And so in general, they're using them for the same type of things that fishers are. They're resting in there, they're mating. Sometimes red squirrels would mate right on the box, bringing in food, but really using it as a safe place to avoid predators. So this is going to loop through. This is one instance of a gray squirrel that used one of our boxes to avoid becoming this bobcat's meal. So we have a lot of pictures we collected, over 3.5 million. We saw a lot of really cool observations of wildlife, and we use these for outreach, which I'll get to in a second. So compared to fishers, though, these other species that use the boxes, first of all, basically every one of our boxes got used by something. The other thing is that these other species would find our boxes a lot quicker, sometimes in days, other times in weeks and months. But we saw this use almost immediately when we put our boxes up. So what does that mean? What are the takeaways? Well, really the larger outcome of this study is really twofold. Putting up den boxes does have broad value to a variety of wildlife, and they will get used by something, but not necessarily by the species that you want to use them. So we did have relatively low use rates. by fishers. I'm happy to answer questions about why we might think that is. We don't completely understand it yet, but really I think there's sort of two take homes for us. The first is that this is not going to be a one-stop solution for what our fisher population decline that we've seen here. In some cases you get use, but it's not like putting out boxes is going to take care of everything. So we are actively engaging with trust fund support in some other research projects to help us better understand other factors. But this really kind of shows even understanding why fishers do or don't use den boxes is something we're trying to learn more about, so that when people, especially the public, want to use them, we can give them the best information about when and where they'll be successful. The other take home, which is something that you see a lot in the wood duck literature, people have been putting up wood duck boxes for a really long time. And what you see in the scientific literature with some of the wood duck projects is that you do get some use, but a lot of researchers advocate for that not being the best way necessarily to provide this habitat element for wood ducks. We think the same is true of fishers. And so this is an opportunity for us to continue to engage between wildlife and forest managers to find ways with forest management, we can continue to balance what we need economically from our forests and what the wildlife that use them also. There are a few other impacts that I'd like to address really quickly before I close here. The first is public engagement. This on the screen here is the first and probably the only fan mail I'll ever get as a wildlife researcher, but this is something that got sent to me by a 7-year-old boy from Michigan. His mom actually emailed this to me during the pandemic. He found a news story on the project and became really fascinated by fishers and den boxes, and we got to correspond through his mother to answer questions that he had about fishers. During the project, we had several hundred actually people reach out, members of the public, most of them from Minnesota, but also the upper Midwest. People as far away as Denmark actually reached out. And this provided a really good opportunity for us to help educate about what fishers are, what they need. Some of these people had never heard of fishers before, many of them had. It also provided a great opportunity for us to really disseminate what we're doing, why we're doing it, the results, and to share den box plans, because most of the people contacting us were really interested in putting up their own den boxes. And so through that, we really think this was a really good impact of this study in terms of sharing that information, but also providing an opportunity for people to engage more with nature, to get out, to put up their own boxes. Two more that I'll cover really quickly before I close here. It takes a lot of time and effort to put up cameras and monitor den boxes with cameras for 3 straight years. We would visit our boxes anywhere from 3 to 4 times a year, changing batteries, changing SD cards, grabbing the images that were on the camera, bringing them back, and then dealing with this high volume of images. We put temperature loggers in the box as an experimental method to see whether that could help us monitor them. And this summer we'll be finishing a paper, but what we found is we developed a new method with temperature loggers that will allow us to continue to monitor these boxes into the future in a lot more efficient way. So one temperature logger, we need to check it about every year, change the battery about every 2 years. And once we get that data back, it takes about 10 minutes for me to run it through our algorithm. And so I should have explained here, this image is essentially when a fisher's in the box, the temperature raises and we can see right when she comes in and right when she leaves. So that's something we're really excited about going forward. And then lastly, we had a graduate student on the project he was really interested in the temperature within tree cavities and den boxes. And so he used some of this data we were collecting to develop a mathematical model that will allow him to predict the temperature within tree cavities and den boxes. And so we've engaged with some folks on bat boxes. And what we're working on with this model right now is what sort of design modifications might we be able to make a den box temperature, the temperature within there, a lot more similar to natural tree cavities. So with that, I would just like to acknowledge, I'm not going to list these all by name, but there are a number of project partners that really worked with us on this project, helped us to complete the work that we are doing here. So I'm really thankful for that, and I want them to be acknowledged here. And with that, again, I would thank you very much for your time, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that we have.
All right, member, any questions to Mr. Joyce? On the box, yes, Ms. Gibson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joyce. Fascinating project. Has there been any thought about putting GPS collars on these fishers to see where they are nesting, having their dens versus the den boxes?
Mr. Joyce?
Yeah, chair members, that's a really good question. We are, as part of a separate project on bobcat and fisher interactions, putting GPS collars on fishers right now. Several of those collars have gone out near our den boxes, and we've been very interested to see where those females are spending time and why, even though we do pick them up on our den boxes, what other opportunities they have for natural cavities and where they're giving birth. So it's a little too early to give results of that, but that's something that we're very interested in to learn more about. You know, in some cases, we've had one of our boxes use really high rates for the last 3 years. And so what else is out there? Why is this? It's contributing to that fisher's, you know, making her living using that as part of her habitat. But why is she not using it for that? So we're really interested in that.
Okay, I see a hand by Mr. Moore online.
Hi,
Mr. Moore.
Professor Joyce. I appreciated your presentation and the note from the 7-year-old child. My question is actually an ecological question. Do you see site fidelity on the boxes that were used by individual fishers, or do they just sort of roam around?
Mr.
Yeah,
Joyce?
chair members, that's another really good question. So fishers have a lot of site fidelity in general. They occupy a territory. They will maintain that territory generally until once they establish a territory, they will maintain that until they die. In rare cases, adult fishers will, you know, if I assume any fisher living where the Greenwood fire took place, there's some situations where they might move, but they do have a lot of fidelity to their home range. Within the home range, they don't tend to use the same cavity every year. So when we get use as rest sites, they will use those sites frequently. For reproduction, once they have a litter, they tend to, once they move them from that site, it might be a few years before they would come back. And we think that's largely because of you have these kits that are defecating in the box, there's parasites and other things that it gets to a point where they need to kind of give that a cooling off period. But for resting, for caching food, for some of these other behaviors, they can reuse it a lot. And we had one site that I don't want to misquote, but many dozens of times we had presumably the same fisher at that site.
Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor, I do have a question. I had talked to some DNR folks a while ago, and they said that there was a problem with bobcats and the mortality rate of fishers because of the abundance of bobcats. Have you seen that in your study?
Mr. Joyce?
Yeah, chair members, another really good question. We have a whole study aimed at studying the interactions between bobcats and fishers that was trust fund funded because of that very thing. So yeah, we don't necessarily see that in the den box project because the cameras were trained on the den boxes. And so if we have bobcats that are roaming around, we wouldn't necessarily pick them up, other than obviously the one that chased the gray squirrel into the box. But the predation rates that the DNR saw of especially bobcats on fishers are not sustainable for the population of fishers. And you could imagine that there's several layers of this, right? So number one, is there enough cavities for fishers? But number two, even if there are the cavities that exist in areas that have a high level of risk from bobcats? Because it is during the time that the females are giving birth and caring to their kits, that's when they're most vulnerable to predation by bobcats. And so again, as we get through that study and learn more about the drivers of habitat selection during that time of year for bobcats, we can then go back and look and say, well, are some of our den boxes in places that are too risky that maybe that's why a female fisher elected not to have her kits there? Or where is the best spot to put a den box, even if, you know, for the public, if they're going to continue to put them up, so that you're not putting it in a place that has as high a risk for bobcats. So that is very much an important part of the conversation about fishers. And it's something that we're really interested to learn more about over the next year or so.
All right, well, thank you for the question and answer, and thank you, Mr. Joyce, for your answer to all. And his presentation is also online, posted on this meeting, and people, if you want to see it, you have to refresh in order to see it. And this will go to the public also. You need to refresh in order to see Mr. Joyce's presentation on the Fisher box. So thank you, Mr. Joyce. And next on our agenda is testifier in person, Mr. Stephen Robinson and Jane DeLambert will presenting their work to categorize unregulated contaminant in source and drinking water. So welcome both, but I think just one of you that will give the presentation, right? Okay. And the other stand by for Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm
Yeah,
Steve
welcome.
Robertson with the Minnesota Department of Health, and this is my colleague, Jane DeLambert. We work together on this project. I'm just trying to get the presentation ready here. Okay,
Okay, you may proceed.
very good. Well, thanks for inviting us to talk about the project that we carried out with the support of the Environment Natural Resource Trust Fund. We're happy to share these results with you. With the project support, we conducted a survey of unregulated contaminants, also sometimes known as contaminants of emerging concern, in a few networks of vulnerable drinking water systems across the state. As a side note, I should mention that this type of monitoring isn't required by the Safe Drinking Water Act, and so the Minnesota Department of Health does not routinely conduct this kind of work. The Safe Drinking Water Act requirements require monitoring for the 100 or so compounds that are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but there's thousands of additional compounds that are in circulation in society. And those we call unregulated contaminants. So we don't routinely do monitoring for these. So the purpose of this project was to carry out a survey of this work, in part because there have been other surveys in other kinds of that have sought to characterize unregulated contaminants or CECs in other kinds of water bodies. But here we sought to do it specifically for drinking water. Because that kind of work hadn't really been done in Minnesota before. So with the study, we wanted to do that. I wonder if they can hear me online. I'm noticing that there's a.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, the computer was saying that it was audio problems.
You may go ahead. I think folks online hear just fine.
Yeah, very good. So this slide shows the two primary goals for the project, where to characterize the presence of selected unregulated contaminants in a variety of drinking water sources and associated finished water. I'm just going to minimize this for you. Oh, thank you. And associated finished water samples. So that means that when we went out to collect samples at the public water systems, we collected samples at the raw water inlet to the public water system and where the water was being introduced into the distribution system after whatever treatment was taking place. And we also sought to use to identify screening approaches, because these types of chemical characterizations, the lab analysis is very expensive. So we wanted to look at whether there were some screening methods that might be useful for characterizing this that we could use in lieu of full-scale lab analysis. So what did we analyze for? There were three networks. We looked at a network of surface water systems. We looked at some groundwater systems that are in the vicinity of where there are potential wastewater discharges nearby. And we looked at groundwater systems in agricultural parts of the state where there may be impacts from agricultural land uses. So the types of parameters that we selected for each of those different networks varied a little bit because of the associated land uses in the vicinity. And some of those groups of compounds are shown here on this slide. For surface water systems, we had the most robust list because those systems are among the most vulnerable in the state. So for those, we looked at pharmaceuticals, pesticide, various wastewater indicators, personal care products, and a variety of other compound classes. In total, the project, we identified over 500 compounds that we looked at in one way, shape, or form in one or more of these networks. So it was a fairly comprehensive survey. So this slide summarizes the overall results, and it does it in a qualitative way. So the colors that you see in this bubble chart here show the various classes of compounds. So dark blue are pesticides, the kind of burnt orange are PFAS compounds, and pharmaceuticals are the light blue. So it's just this graph is intended to show just what. Just in a short snapshot, what the overall results are. We certainly found CECs in a lot of the samples, but by and large, this is I want to emphasize that most of our results were for we only really found 32% of the samples had results that indicated the presence of a CEC. So the size of the bubble on this chart indicates the frequency of detection. So there's a few compounds that were found in a lot of the different wells were found fairly frequently. And others were just only detected once or twice in the overall survey. So as I indicated before, the non-detects outnumber detections, and that's pretty common in studies of this kind. So I'm not really going to discuss the results in any more detail than this. We have a report online where that summarizes what we found where and what the various detection frequencies were for the different parameters. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of an overview of what the results mean and how we've been using them. So as I indicated before, very few samples, well, no, I didn't, very few samples exceeded the health-based guidance threshold. So one of the first things we did with the results we obtained is we compared them to existing health-based guidance information. Mostly that's information that the health department has prepared in the form of health risk limits or health-based guidance values. And we wanted to make sure that there wasn't any, based on that preliminary assessment, that there weren't any health concerns relative to the occurrence information that we were obtaining. And we found very few. And when there were, we followed up with the systems to make sure that they were aware of what the results were and that they could take appropriate response actions to protect their public from exposure. And detections were just a small fraction of the overall results. I mentioned that before. Only 32% of the analyses showed any kind of positive result. Pesticides and PFAS were the classes of compounds that were most commonly detected. And especially for PFAS, that's a fairly common result. We're hearing a lot these days about PFAS compounds. And in fact, we've initiated a follow-on study to this one where we've been trying to characterize PFAS compounds statewide in all drinking water systems. The results also indicated slightly different occurrence frequencies in surface water relative to groundwater and in vulnerable groundwater settings relative to non-vulnerable settings. Some of the outcomes that I think are important to mention here are that at the very outset of the project, our ability to carry it out, we realized was a little bit at risk just because we hadn't really established a clear and consistent risk management framework within which we could be doing this work. So public water systems operate, they inherit a lot of trust in the way in which they operate their systems, and people expect that the water that they're that's being delivered from those systems is safe for consumption. And if the work we were seeking to do required the voluntary participation of public water systems statewide, and some of them were anxious that the results that we would obtain might undermine the trust and credibility of their systems. So we had to, before we could even begin the sampling, in order to gain their trust in the importance of doing this work, we had to put together a response framework to assure them that we would prepare appropriate risk communication materials, we would have risk mitigation strategies, and we would have a framework that would guide how we would respond depending on what the results obtained were going to be. And that those steps weren't initially we weren't anticipating having to do that as part of this project. We were just going to go out and start collecting samples, but we had to do that work in order to gain the voluntary participation of the public water systems. So all that has been done and is key and is set us up for continuing to do this kind of work. Secondly, we used some of the results to nominate multiple of the unregulated contaminants that we detected in our work for the development of more health-based guidance information. So there's a process by which compounds get selected for review for health-based guidance development. And we used the results of our study to inform how that was going to be working. And lastly, this work helped to catalyze the operations within the health department to put into place, to seek resources through the Clean Water Fund to put into place more permanent capacity for doing work of this type. So we're with this current legislative session, we're seeking additional support from the legislature through the Clean Water Fund to establish what we're going to be calling a drinking water ambient monitoring program. And with that, we'll have firm capacity in place for continuing to do this work off into the future. So I'm going to end there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Members, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I think Chair Hansen has a question. Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Robertson. So I'm looking at the high health-based guidance with the pentachlorophenol. Was there a follow-up nearby to see if there was a point source there? That's my understanding. That's a wood treatment a compound pesticide and is not as mobile as, say, some of the other ones. So was there any follow-up examination nearby? Was that, well, first off, was that groundwater or surface water?
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Hansen. Pentachlorophenol is actually the schedules of contaminants that we selected were generally unregulated contaminants, but because they were fairly broad, they also included a few ones that were regulated. Pentachlorophenol happened to be one of those. When that was detected, I think it was in a groundwater system, right, Jane? We conducted follow-up sampling to confirm whether this was going to be a long-term concern or not. And at that system, there's also, through the source water protection work we do, we inventory potential sources of contamination in the vicinity. And my recollection is there is no smoking gun in terms of the sources that we've identified in close proximity. So what happens in this case is we continue then to monitor the system and make sure that there's no surprises off into the future. So that's the way that's what the outcome has been in that situation.
Thank you, Chair Hansen.
Thank you. And a follow-up. So looking at the other pesticides, metolachlor, atrazine, looks like an atrazine breakdown product. That's fairly old chemistry. That's not new products. So it appears that those are the ones that are showing up the most. Is that correct?
So those Oh, Mr. Chair, Representative Hanson, yes, that's correct.
And is that distributed across the state or is that in certain regions?
I'm gonna phone my friend here, Jane, to
Ms.
see if she
Lambert.
can answer that more specifically.
That is distributed across the state. On our report on our website, we do have some results broken out by region. But we do see those groups, pesticides pretty evenly throughout the whole state.
So, Mr. Chair, I worked
Yeah,
on
Mr.
best management practices for atrazine in 1990 when I worked at the Department of Agriculture as a voluntary educational effort to try to reduce the impacts on groundwater and surface water.
Thank you.
33 years ago.
Wow, thank you for the history there. We have three members having a question. So Senator Green.
Thank you. Mine is really simple. Thank you for the printout here, but do you have graphs of the chemicals that you found instead of just the picture of the ball there, where I can look and see what chemicals, how much was in them as far as parts per million, and where you got them from? Do you have all those online? Can I look those up?
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Green, we have a report online, a data summary report. I can provide that to the director and she can, a link to that, and she can forward that to you.
Great, thank you.
Now we're going to online member for question, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chair Herr. That was a really excellent presentation. And I'd like the presenter to touch on, if you could, policy and treatment. And I led a study for LCCMR a few years ago looking at both pharmaceuticals and hormones in the environment broadly, in the media of sediments, waters, and fish tissues, and they were ubiquitous. 100% of samples had some level of either pharmaceuticals or hormones in them. And my question to you is, do you anticipate it? And you're talking about drinking water, where we're seeing some of the same pharmaceuticals and chemicals of emerging concern. Do you see in the future some policy change or some wastewater or drinking water treatment like reverse osmosis helping to resolve some of these issues with some of these different chemicals that we're seeing both in wastewater and drinking water? And the reason is because there are impacts to biota even at parts per trillion levels for some of these things.
Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Chair, representative or member of the commission, I missed your name, sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe probably the class of contaminants for which policy and mitigation approaches are most mature are for PFAS compounds. There's just been so much attention on PFAS occurrence in the environment and the potential to affect drinking water that's moved along further. So not least of which because of the large scale contamination that exists in the East Metro due to PFAS. And I will say that some of the policy considerations here, there's a fairly comprehensive blueprint that the state has prepared for that has to do with how we're going to try to remove PFAS production, sources, and releases to the environment that was produced by the MPCA, and only part of that refers to drinking water. But at the heart of it is trying to reduce the production of these and the release, their subsequent or the potential for release into the environment. And if that can be minimized, then the potential for impact to drinking water systems is smaller. On the treatment end of things, yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening, especially for PFAS, because those are difficult compounds to remove. But the standard technologies are the ones that are getting installed right now. Many of the innovative technologies haven't gotten to the point where they're at production scale. But some of the technology, RO is a potentially useful one, and could actually, one of the benefits of RO beyond just the use for PFAS is it has the potential to remove a broad spectrum of contaminants, but it's expensive to implement and it requires a fair amount of energy to operate and operation and maintenance to continue to operate. So there are technologies for treatment, but very few systems in the state use them, and very few systems have gotten to the point where they've had to put them into place because of the occurrence of unregulated contaminants.
Thank you. We have one more question from online, Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about Norgestrel. I noticed that you included pesticides and PFAS as the primary ones, but Norgestrel is the second highest detected chemical. And so I was just curious, are you considering that forever chemical, or is that in a separate category? And why isn't the pharmaceutical brought forward as well? It seems, and perhaps you could also explain what Norgestrel is. And I understand it's no longer used or allowed in the US. Is that correct?
Mr. Robertson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, and I'm not sure, Jane, you?
Ms. Lambert.
We might have to look that up and follow up with you.
Which chemical?
Progesterol. I didn't see it on my summary of the top.
Norgestrel, it's a 69%. It's a oral contraceptive.
Right, I just didn't see it on my list of the most frequently detected in our results.
Are you
Norgestrel. Is that what you're talking about?
Mr.
Yes.
Reese?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I think as a whole, we tended to see pesticides and PFAS showing up the most. There were other compounds that showed up frequently as well. But as a whole, PFAS and pesticides were the two classes that we saw detected most frequently.
Mr. Chair, follow up, please.
Yes, Mr. Reese.
I would assume this falls in the category of hormones, and I noted that hormones and I did not come within the categories that you outlined, but yet it seems like that's significant. Why weren't pharmaceuticals listed in that same category with the top two?
Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Chair, yeah, that graph was summarizing the most frequently detected. So there was one pharmaceutical that you identified that hit that list, but there were many others in the PFAS category and in the pesticide category that were among the most frequent contaminant. That one happened to be present. That one had a high detection frequency, but it was one of the few within that class that did. So it was a little bit unusual in that respect.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just one. I mean, it's 69% of all. The way I read this is that 69% of all samples tested had presence of Norgestrel in it, and that seems significant to me.
Oh, no question. It is, Mr. Chair. So,
yeah,
excuse
Mr.
me.
Robbins.
That it most definitely is significant. I'm not minimizing that at all. I was just pointing out that it's one of the few pharmaceuticals that happens to have a high detection frequency. There in the other parameter classes, there are multiple individual compounds that occur frequently in our results, and that's why we had pulled those out. But yeah, not to minimize was not intending to minimize the significance or the importance of that. Of that particular result.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair, just one last final comment. I would agree that it would be nice to see the parts per million and then what threshold was considered. What is the threshold to be considered having a health impact with all these chemicals? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. For the sake of time, we're past our, okay. So if members have any question, you could submit your question to Director Nash, and then she'll pass it on and get the answer back to you, to those members that are here and those online. So just to be noted that we're 15 minutes behind schedule. So not that we're gonna move very quick on our speed up in our verbal as we move forward, but thank you both for being here. See, now next on our agenda is the item number 6, the Rights Exchange Environmental Remediation and Restriction Covenant. Mr. Jim Jansen from the town of Crane Lake, and Jennifer Force from CEH, and Jeff Anderson. And yes, Michael will introduce this agenda item, which is for informational only, no action required. There is a memo and a map in your package. So please introduce yourself for the record. Oh, Michael will take care of this. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Her and members, the town of Crane Lake is here to provide an information-only update at the request of the commission. At the August 30th, 2022 meeting, the commission approved a request for an exchange of property rights to resolve ownership issues that had not been resolved prior to acquiring land using trust fund dollars. They needed this to construct a campground and visitor center, and which are also being funded with trust fund dollars. The August approval included the town of Crane Lake returning at a future meeting to provide an update on the project. For new members, and as a reminder, in 2018, the town of Crane Lake acquired land using trust fund dollars with the intent of building a visitor center and campground for Voyageurs National Park. In 2021, the town received 2 appropriations, one to build the visitor center and the second to build the campground. In 2022, the town of Crane Lake requested and received approval from the commission to convey to a neighbor 0.12 acres of land, a road access easement, and pedestrian dock access easement in exchange for the termination of a common interest community and associated rights. While reviewing this request, staff learned that there is a petroleum release site on this land acquired in 2018. The MPCA is actively working to clean up this site through the Petroleum Release Site Program, and the land is enrolled in the MPCA Brownfields program. In the future, after the construction is complete, LCCMR approval will be needed for a restrictive covenant and environmental access easement to be put on the land. Staff have provided the memo from the August 30th, 2022 meeting, which includes more context related to the request to convey land rights and the environmental issue. We have also provided for reference a map that shows the project site, monitoring wells related to the petroleum leak site, the visitor center and campground. And additionally, Crane Lake recently reported they are receiving higher than expected bids. We have asked them to update members on their plans to address this. Again, no action is needed from the commission today. This is an informational update only. Chair Her and members, if you would like more information, we can certainly get that to you. Just let us know. If there are any questions for staff, we can take them at this time. Otherwise, when the chair is ready, the town of Crane Lake is here now with an update on the project.
You may proceed, and please state your name for the record.
Mr. Chair and commission members, Jeff Anderson, lobbyist and consultant with Crane Lake Township. With me online today is Jim Jansen with Crane Lake Township, as well as Jason Chop and Jennifer Force with SEH, and Donna Visco and Don Sathers with St. Louis County, who is the fiscal agent for the project. With that, I would turn it over to Mr. Jansen and Mr. Chop for an update on the project.
Okay, you may proceed. Are you online?
They are both online.
Yes. Yep.
Please state your name for the record, and you may begin your presentation.
Jason, I assume you'll go ahead.
Sure thing. Jason Chop here with SEH. I can provide updates on the status of the projects. Both the visitor center and campground projects were bid through St. Louis County, who is the fiscal agent. There were very few bidders the first go around. On the campground, the bids came in high, and the town has elected to reject the bids and is currently rebidding the project. That project advertised the rebid on April 6th, and the bids are scheduled to open this Friday, April 28th. Regarding the visitor center, again, the bids did come in high, and currently the town is holding the low bid on that project with hopes that supplemental funds will be secured so that they're able to award the visitor center without a rebid. Regarding the contamination status, I would pass that. I'll pass that over to Jen, and she can provide an update.
My name is Jennifer Force, and I'm with SEH, and I've been assisting the town of Crane Lake with the environmental contamination issues at the site. Since the August memo, the MPCA has conducted their first round of treatment to reduce the contaminant concentrations in the groundwater. That was completed in October. And so far they have completed 2 rounds of groundwater monitoring. And initial results do show a decrease in the petroleum contamination in the groundwater at the site, which is good news. The MPCA is currently planning on conducting the follow-up sampling. They have 2 additional rounds of follow-up sampling that they're hoping to conduct in May and June of this year. That, of course, is weather dependent. So as soon as there's some frozen monitoring wells, and as soon as those free up, they'll go out and do that follow-up sampling. Also, since the August memo, the project did apply for a cleanup grant through the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development for $87,000 to install the vapor mitigation system below the visitor center and also conduct the environmental monitoring and testing that's required. So that work will be done concurrently with construction. And then after the system is activated, the MPCA will require that a restrictive covenant and access easement be placed on the property, mainly as a notification that there is contamination on the property, and that the concentrations of petroleum contamination in the soil vapor require that an active mitigation system be operated until those contaminant levels drop to a specified level.
Okay, well, thank you. Any question from members, or do you still want to do you have more to present?
Mr. Chair and members, I would just follow up by saying, related to funding, we are working with the Department of Iron Range Resources as well as St. Louis County to identify funding for any potential gaps that may occur due to inflationary costs related to the bidding, so that this project can move forward in a timely fashion. And I would be remiss too, Mr. Chair, not to thank the Commission for their past support of this project. And we're excited to see it moving forward.
Ms. Gibson.
Thank you. Do you have any renditions of the that we can see what the project's going to look like, whether it's the building or the campground? I saw the site map, but I didn't see anything from the ground.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chair, Chair Gibson, I don't know if Jason has that potential to share those online, but we can certainly send those to you after the meeting.
Yeah, I don't have that readily available, but I can share it, send it out via email.
Okay, thank you. Any question from members? And Mr. Anderson, I noted that in the Senate omnibus bill, we do include this the Crane Lake project. I'm not sure whether it has the same specification, but is 1.9 million. Is that would that be adequate to add on to to this if the bid is higher than you expected?
Mr. Chair, first of all, thank you for including that in your omnibus. The language for that, those dollars create some flexibility, but primarily those were funds are to be used for the DNR boat launch that is associated with this project, located adjacent to it. DNR currently has a boat launch facility in Crane Lake. This would be needed upgrades to it, but the language in your bill does provide some flexibility if there are gaps in funding, specifically with the Visitors Center, to be able to use some of those to make sure this project is completed in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All right, well, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Anderson, and those that are online. See Jennifer Force and so Jim Jensen. Next on our agenda, see it's the item number 7. It said action on LCCMR operational procedure modification. And Becca, can you introduce this item, this agenda item?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, and there is also a handout in your packet that corresponds to this agenda item. The Legislative Coordinating Commission earlier this year passed a resolution requiring that joint commissions adopt procedural rules that prohibit joint commission meetings occurring during floor session of the House or Senate. Basically, we want to prevent a situation where a member cannot fully participate due to legislative obligations, which must take priority. So we would like to amend our operational procedures accordingly. While we were looking at our operational procedures, we thought we might address another policy that came up recently across several of the commissions, and that relates to the provision that allows members to continue to serve until reappointed or replaced. We had a situation earlier this year where we hadn't had new LCCMR members appointed, but we needed to meet in January. And there were some legislators that were no longer holding public office. And so we were trying to create sort of a uniform policy across commissions. And so this would state that citizen members continue to serve until reappointed or replaced, and that legislative members, as long as they are still holding office in the given office in which they were appointed, can continue to serve. So we have these shown on page 3 and page 6 of the operational procedures that are included in your packets. While we were working on this, we also did correct some nomenclature, some grammar, some organizational and flow issues, but none of those were substantive changes. So we're not showing those to you here, but we could take this as one motion for each of these changes or one motion for both of these changes, whatever your preference.
Okay. To simplify, and any comment from members? Rita.
Member Albrecht.
Oh, Member Aldrich.
I think Member Peichel had his hand up first, but I'll move the operational modifications as presented.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Oh, yeah.
Questions
Discussion.
again.
Yeah, discussion.
And Member Peichel had a question.
All right. Yep. Member Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be in
Peichel,
order
yeah,
to
Peichel.
offer additional modification, perhaps as an amendment to this motion?
Yes, you may.
Okay, I'd like to offer language I'm sending to Michael here as an additional modification. On page 5, under item 5B, I would like to incorporate a 5th bullet of conflicts managed through procedures to address the consideration that serving as a legislator for a district where a proposed capital project or local impact proposal is cited is a conflict that ought to be managed through procedures.
Do you all hear that? Well, clear. Okay.
I didn't understand what you were saying. What does it mean?
Member Pike, can you clarify?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My consideration is that there is a risk of a perceived conflict of interest when legislators serve a given district and there is either a capital project building, let's say, a visitor center, and their representation in that space presents sort of a dual benefit role for them. And I would hate to have someone question the legitimacy of their support of a project because they're located and representing that district.
And Senator Green, you have comments on
I
that?
think that could be a problem. I don't know that I have any projects. I don't know if it applies to me or not. But legislators, you would be, I would think with that proposal, eliminating any projects in your district because they may benefit you. I would hope that we would have to do more discussion on that before we went ahead and adopted that.
Any comment from other members? How do we vote on his motion, or do we?
We have to vote on that amendment.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Let's see. Can see.
Reese, Member Reese.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Reese.
Yeah, I think there's a distinct difference between members that are appointed and members that are elected. And they have election representatives and senators just by the inherent nature are representing their constituents. They do not have a conflict of voting on within the legislature, voting on bonding bills or any other bills that affect and impact their districts. They are representing their people. So I think that I even question whether that's constitutional at this point, that you can restrict a duly appointed or duly elected representative and senator from voting on proposals from their own districts. So I would encourage members to vote against that.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Just want to make sure that we stick to our agenda, and I know that people are clear with our process here. So we're gonna make a motion we're gonna vote based on Mr. Albright motion.
Mr. Chair, I did have my hand up.
Okay. Let's hear from Mr. Becker. Is it Mr. Becker?
Yes, I would agree with Senator Green and Mr. Reese there. We as representatives carry a very high profession and really carry ourselves well in these matters. And if we're going to start to eliminate the voice of the people in a particular geographic area, I think we're setting a very much on precedence. Now, if the rep would had a direct monetary benefit, like if they own the land and they're buying the land from a representative or a senator, that's a whole different discussion. But our constituents hire us to be the voice of the district and voice of the state. So I think this would set a very poor precedent. So I agree with Senator Green.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just on a clarifying, there was Commissioner Peichel making an amendment. So there's an amendment that we were considering, the amendment to restrict legislators from voting on the projects that may be in their district. Is that what the item of business we're on?
And I would need the assistant of backup because from my side of the Senate, we will make a motion on the amendment first and then the motion on is that the process,
That's
simpler process, right?
So you want to vote on the amendment to the motion first.
Okay,
So,
all right.
Heichel's amendment to the motion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, point
All right.
of order, just a clarification. I didn't actually hear the amendment moved. I think there was a question about, I thought it sounded like that there was a question about whether that could be added in. I didn't hear the formal amendments.
Mr. Pico, is Mr. Reese remarks correct?
It was my understanding that after, Mr. Chair, after you addressed the question of whether it would be in order to offer an amendment, I was then offering the amendment as stated.
Okay, so you offering the amendment. Okay, so we have to vote on the amendment first. This Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would speak against the amendment. This is actually a legislative commission. We're in the legislative branch. It would be peculiar, to say the least, if in the legislative commission, legislators were unable to be voting. I think disclosure just is important to say this is something in my district or someone else's district, but I think exclusion in the legislative branch. So I would speak against the amendment. And just a clarifying question, do these votes require roll call votes?
From Director Nash.
Mr. Chair, yes, because we're in hybrid mode, we have to have roll call votes.
Okay, roll call on the amendment to restrict legislator. The amendment by Mr. Pico. Diana, can you take the roll call?
Acom. Acom is excused. Albrecht.
No.
Albrecht, no. Backer.
No.
Backer, no. Deestick is excused. Faber.
Faber, no.
Faber, no. Gibson.
No.
Gibson, no. Green.
No.
Green, no. Hanson.
No.
Hanson, no. Her.
No.
Her, no. Heinzman. Hollins.
No.
Hollins, no. Langseth. Langseth. Moore.
I think Langseth is trying to get her mic turned on. I can wait.
No. Langseth, no, thank you. Moore.
More hears the concern and recognizes it. I will vote no, given the testimony provided by the legislators, but I think that we should, we and they should pay attention to the concerns that Jeremy raised.
Moore, no. Morrison.
Morrison, no.
Morrison, no. Pikel.
Pikel, no.
Pikel, no. Reese.
No.
Reese, no. Westrom is excused. Currently, there are 13 noes, 0 yes. Motion did not prevail.
Okay, okay, you hear from Diane. Hold on, motion does not prevail. Let's see who's online that just spoke.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Reese.
Just point of order on that. I just wanted to point out that there is no discussion during voting.
Great, point well taken. Now back to the original amendment. And so, okay, to approve the modification as presented. Motion, Mr. Albright motion. So Diane, can you take the roll call?
Acom, excused. Albrecht.
Yes.
Albrecht, yes. Backer.
Yes.
Backer, yes. Deestick is excused. Faber. Faber.
Faber, aye.
Faber, yes. Gibson.
Yes.
Gibson, yes. Green.
Yes.
Green, yes. Hanson.
Yes.
Hanson, yes. Her.
Yes.
Her, yes. Heinzman is excused. Hollins.
Yes.
Hollins, yes. Langseth.
Yes.
Langseth, yes. Moore.
More yes.
Moore, yes. Morrison.
Morrison, yes.
Morrison, yes. Pikel.
Pikel, yes.
Pikel, yes. Reese.
Reese, yes.
Reese, yes. Currently, there are 13 yes, 0 no. Motion did prevail.
Thank you. Okay. All right, now, next on agenda is, item number 8, proposal evaluation selection process for 2024 LCCMR recommendation, and, Director, Nashville, introduced this, agenda item. There is a memo in your package. Ideally, we can act on the first 2 items. If members are up for it, they can act on the 3rd action item as well. Otherwise, we can wait until June 8th. We'll see, because we're about 20 minutes behind schedule now. So, Director Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. The deadline for funding request for the 2024 RFP cycle was March 31st. In response, we received 218 proposals requesting 174 million. We have 79 million available for appropriation this year. Staff are currently reviewing these proposals for completeness and fit, and will soon be sending you the proposals for your review. Before you begin reviewing, however, the commission needs to decide if there are going to be any modifications to the evaluation and decision-making process. Last year, after considering several options, the commission decided on and used a new approach to more effectively and efficiently come to agreement on proposal recommendations. At the end of the process, members did provide feedback, and the overwhelming majority of the feedback was positive, though there were a couple areas that were noted to have potential for improvement. So the memo in your packets goes through the process in detail and provides a few options for changes if members want to entertain them. And I do want to thank Mike and Michael for their help with the memo and for thinking through the options with me. At a high level, the evaluation process includes all submitted proposals being distributed to the LCCMR for an initial evaluation, which we call evaluation number 1. And then using the results from evaluation number 1, the commission selects a subset of proposals for further consideration. That subset of proposals presents before the commission, and then LCCMR members are given another opportunity for evaluation, and we call that evaluation number 2. Using the results from evaluation 2, the commission selects proposals for recommendation to the legislature and also decides at what level each of those proposals is recommended. So as Chair Hurst said, we're asking that today members at least take action on how the evaluation 1 and decision-making and evaluation number 1 decision-making and presentations will occur. And if there's time, we can talk about and take action on evaluation 2 and the decision-making process.
Chair Gibson.
Thank you, Senator Hur. I'm trying to read all this again. I actually read it online last night. Last year, I really liked the process. And one of the things I liked about it was the fact that we came up with our own budgets. Is that in this evaluation 1? I'm not seeing where we did that. Or am I not reading it properly?
Director Nash.
Mr. Chair and members, that does take place in evaluation number 2.
Okay. So. All right, then I guess I would like to move evaluation 2, if that is as close to what we did last year.
Do proceed with 1 first, complete 1 first. Okay, we'll note that in, and when it comes to 2, you can motion.
Okay.
And do I call a member to motion, or do I?
Members, if I can go into additional detail about the additional option that we provided for evaluation number 1, if members would like. Otherwise, if you're ready to make a motion, that would be fine. I think what happened last year with the evaluation number 1 is that we asked members to all submit their top 3rd ranking proposals. Staff tallied those up and created a list ranked in order of high to low according to the number of members that selected that proposal. And then members decided in advance that they would pick the top 80 to advance for presentation. Members also decided that they wanted to have the Senate, the House, and the citizens each get together and pick up to 3 additional proposals to add for presentation. What ended up happening is that based on ties and those additional selections, the number of proposals that you selected came into about 85 to present. And when we tallied that up, it turns out that they were requesting just about the exact amount that was available for appropriation. So we've written in the memo here an option if you wish to have a bigger pool of proposals from which to select after presentations. You might want to, instead of having that first cut be the top 80, you might instead want to have it be a certain percentage of request versus the amount available. So you could say, we would like to have presentations to hear the top proposals selecting 125% or 150%, for example, of the funding that's available. And that way you're making sure that you're kind of overshooting a little bit, giving yourself some flexibility. The challenge is that you don't then know how many presentations you're going to have. If there are a lot of smaller projects, for example, that make that first cut, you're going to have a lot of presentations. If there are a lot of larger projects that make that first cut, you probably would have fewer presentations. But at least you would guarantee that you're selecting at least the number of presentations that there's funding available for.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, we'll go to Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd move evaluation option 1 to get it on the table.
Okay, Chair Hansen moved that for the 2024 RFP. The LCCMR adopt evaluation 1 and select the process described as Director Nash just mentioned. So the roll call by
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for Director Nash. Last year, we were allowed to make these proposals or select a third of the projects. And then there also was an option to identify funding level. If I recall from last year, the funding level wasn't really used for any reason. Just so we all understand what the process, are we going to use or be allowed to put down the funding level, or should we just disregard that and not include that because of that purpose? Didn't seem like that was really utilized for any purpose.
Director Nash.
Mr. Chair and members, during evaluation number 1, which is sort of the first cut, deciding which proposals get advanced for presentation, there was no writing down of dollar amounts. Each member can put notes in your evaluation that then get aggregated and shared with members. So if you have thoughts about a dollar amount, you can enter it in your notes for other members to see. It was during evaluation number 2 where members were able to determine each allocate a certain amount of money to each proposal.
Okay, thank you.
And that is still, we're assuming that is the process, as long as members are okay with it. We're assuming that would be the process this year as well.
Ms. Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification to the motion maker. Are you suggesting that we accept that revising step 4, initially select for presentation a number of proposals that represents a portion of the amount of funds available rather than a set number of proposals? And if so, are you thinking that we request a total amount of 125% or 150%, for example? What proportion of the amount of funds available are you suggesting in your motion? Thank you.
Okay, Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Albright. In moving option 1, I was going with as written rather than as was orally described. So my understanding of the motion is that we would be on cut number 1, taking 1/3 of the entire pool. And that is going to be aggregated, and then we would still take the top 80, which is I am aware that is a low number that may not provide us with the math. The 1/3 would not, that cut does not result in cuts in dollars. It is just picking for projects to here. I am open if there was an amendment on numbers, but I thought it would be appropriate to do what we did last year, but I realized that since we have more projects, perhaps we go with a higher number, but I have not included that in the motion. I'm moving it as it is.
Director Nash.
And just as clarification, Mr. Chair, would that also include the 3 additional that the House, Senate, and citizen members could select?
Chair Hansen.
Mr. Chair and Ms. Nash, yes, because that would be, we're already lower, that is the opportunity. But if I think where we were at last year, that provides the opportunity that the House, the Senate, or the citizens may choose not to add projects as well.
So did I see a show of hand?
Albrecht, Backer,
Albrecht.
and Gibson have
Backer,
questions.
okay. Let's go Albrecht and Backer, then Chair Gibson. This is the order. So go ahead, Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Becker.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, what didn't work last year with the process? You know, I'm going to have to say I'm a little naive being new on the board, but why are we making these changes? Did something break last year that it didn't work, or did the process last year work? If someone could provide me that history, that would be appreciated.
Okay, Chair Henson.
Mr. Chair and Representative Backer, I'm not proposing changes. We have more applicants this year than last year. So by keeping a third, we're actually going to have more numbers coming in. We picked a third last year. So my motion is that it is the same as last year. And one of the things that I thought was awesome, Representative Backer, is that Representative Lewick and Representative Tice voted for the final project. So, you know, I think if you're supportive of that process led to a bipartisan support for the recommendations.
Okay, Chair Gibson, any?
Thank you. Chair Hansen, just for clarity, so the second round, we would be able to put a price tag on the projects.
And we're just moving about evaluation 1 right now, not.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
So we got moving along. Maybe Diana, go ahead and take the roll call.
Acomb, excused. Albrecht.
Yes.
Albrecht, yes. Backer.
Yes.
Backer, yes. D-Stick, excused. Faber.
Faber, aye.
Faber, yes. Gibson.
Yes.
Gibson, yes. Green. Green, yes. Hanson.
Yes.
Hanson, yes. Her.
Yes.
Her, yes. Heinzman is excused. Collins.
Yes.
Collins, yes. Langseth.
Yes.
Langseth, yes. Moore.
More yes.
Moore, yes. Morrison.
Morrison, yes.
Morrison, yes. Pikel.
Michael, yes.
Pikel, yes. Reese.
Reese, yes.
Reese, yes. Westrom is excused. Currently, there are 13 yes, 0 no. Motion prevailed.
Okay, motion prevail. Now to action 2, Chair Gibson move for the 2024 RFP
Do we want to do presentations?
presentation. Okay, go ahead. Chair Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. It's complicated. So what I'm trying to get to is what worked last year. And it looks like you're looking at me funny, Becca. So I'm just trying to figure out if these agreement modifications are similar to what we had last year. And if they are, that's what I'd like to move. And if they aren't, that's what I want to remove. So.
Director Nash.
Mr. Chair and members, I think one option would be to just move that we handle evaluation number 2 and the initial agreement to be exactly as it was last year.
Okay.
That would be one option.
All right, that is what I will move then. Evaluation number 2 with the initial agreement modification.
Okay, any discussion from members? Do I see a hand up there?
Reese has his hand up.
Or, okay, Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think an earlier question by Representative Becker, I'd like to address it for this and what went wrong last year, even though there were the 3 representatives or 2 representatives you mentioned had voted for it. One of the issues was that the way that zeros were accounted for. I think this year it spells it out that how that process will occur. Last year, in my opinion, it was not known prior to the voting how that how the zeros would be accounted for, and so that created some issues where the votes may have been different if that would have been brought up prior to the second evaluation period. So I think this is as long as people know going into it what the rules are, I think that's the point. And I think this definitely describes that in a little bit better detail. I would just one second comment on the budgets. I still believe, and I know this was not the feeling of the entire commission, that we should be looking at these budgets more closely and have the opportunity to reduce them. A vote does not necessarily signify that you agree with the full budget, and just having a blanket statement saying that we're going to fully fund these projects or have a certain percentage that we're going to fund them, I don't think that really does justice to the process and what we're supposed to be doing, in my opinion. I would think that at the legislature, when bonding proposals come in and things like that, that they're always under scrutiny for what the money is going to be spent for. And I think we should also take that into consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any discussion then?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Representative Becker.
I would ditto that. That was well said.
Okay. Point well taken.
Motion on the floor.
Yeah, the motion on the floor is, do you want to say one more time and then?
Yes, I move evaluation number 2 and the initial agreement modification options.
Okay, so let's,
Stated in the memo.
okay, let's have a roll call.
Mr. Chair, we could not hear the motion online, or I could not.
I apologize. I forgot to turn my mic on. I move evaluation number 2 with the initial agreement modification options for 2024 as stated in the memo.
Okay, everybody heard that? All right, now roll call.
Acom excused, Albrecht.
Albright, yes.
Albrecht, yes. Becker.
Becker, yes.
Becker, yes. D-Stick excused. Faber.
Faber, aye.
Faber, yes. Gibson.
Yes.
Gibson, yes. Green.
Yes.
Green, yes. Hanson.
Yes.
Hanson, yes. Her.
Yes.
Her, yes. Heinzman excused. Hollins.
Yes.
Hollins, yes. Langseth.
Yes.
Langseth, yes. Moore.
More yes.
Moore, yes. Morrison.
Morrison, yes.
Morrison, yes. Pikel.
Michael, yes.
Pikel, yes. Reese.
Reese, yes.
Reese, yes. Westrom is excused. Currently, there are 13 yes, 0 no. Motion prevails.
Okay, motion prevail. All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification,
Yes, Mr. Pike.
this is Commissioner Reese. Had a question on what we just voted on. There was some ifs in that language, and I just want to make sure that we are clear on what we just voted on. Number 3, for example, was number 2 selected, or was it because it says number 3? We could include blanks, non-allocations, and calculations at 0. So I just want to clarify what the motion was again, what we just voted on, so that there's no misunderstanding as we go into the scoring.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to have Director Nash explain that one more time. I think many of us here are clear about what we vote for, but go ahead, Director Nash.
Mr. Chair and members, I think the motion was to have evaluation number 2 and compiled results and initial agreement on recommendations be as stated in the memo.
Okay, so Mr. Chair,
Reese. Yes, Mr. Reese.
I'm sorry for having to ask this again, but when I heard the motion, it said evaluation number 2 and initial agreement modification options for 2024. Is that, I believe I heard that in the motion, but
I
then
see.
down further, it says in the number 3, it has, we could include blanks, non-allocations and calculations of 0. Is that the understanding? Because we should be definite on this is the point.
Yeah. Mr.
Director Nash.
Mr. Chair and members, I think the intent was that evaluation number 2 would occur as it happened last year. And initial agreement on recommendations would occur as it happened last year. So you would ignore the evaluation number 2 and initial agreement modification options for 2024. We're not adopting any of those modifications for this year.
Mr. Reese.
Okay, well, if that's, I misheard the motion.
Yes.
I believe if we went back, it said initial agreement on modification options, but I'll accept that, just so we are all on the same page. And now we
Okay.
have it on record. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for giving a good chairman initiation. Today was the first day I chair the LCCMR. And if I miss any point or if I'm clumsy in any way, my apology, and look forward to continue to do this work the best I can. And thank you, Chair Gisham. Thank you, Chair Hansen, and also all members out there, including legislator and citizen alike. So we a few announcements. We're not going to go to item number 9, but Director Nash will send out a survey to you to choose which will be a site visit, which block of time would be better site visit for you. Option 1 or option 2, she will send a survey, and we will not have a testimony today as well due to our time that we are already passed in about 10 minutes of our time. So members, I will adjourn this LCCMR committee until next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair was